we're on.
Okay, I was asked a very valid question after the last session, and that was, I talked about knocking it back with zinc white, and what did I mean and what was the effect? So what I do with zinc is I paint the area that is to be knocked back in zinc white, and it looks quite strong as I put it on. And it doesn't matter too much if I go over the edge, because it will, to a large extent, be invisible on the very pale background. But you must go at least as far as the edge. Now, the reason for doing this is I want the rocks to seem considerably further away than these new rocks in the foreground. So they're much further forward, and that's much further back.
Just to explain as well, we are going to do the Q&A for Monday's questions as well. We're just going to finish this part of this painting because somebody asked that question, and also I'm sort of trying to keep the ratio of painting to Q&A, bulk painting and working with the Q&A sort of as a bonus. But we will get to that. So Dad's going to be doing painting, and then we will get to your questions.
Yes, this is basically an extended Q&A rather than a live painting session, because when you see it, it won't actually be live.
Might come in a bit. Is that a very dilute zinc white, or is it as it comes out of the tube?
It's quite dilute. It's about 50-50 with water. That really is to make it easier to use, not because I need it to be dilute. But yeah, it goes on in a way that suits me at that dilution.
Is one layer a good amount, or do you sometimes do more than one?
Often, if I'm careful, I do 2 or 3 pale, very dilute layers, so I can build it up carefully. And this will be, in this particular case, at least the 3rd, possibly the 4th layer.
When you have something like the foliage of the tree, do you have to go over that very carefully and exactly with the zinc?
To be honest, no. I don't have to be too careful with that, because, as I say, the zinc white dries relatively invisible on the very pale background. It really only shows on the dark background. But it gives the impression of there being mist or something in the atmosphere, and you get aerial perspective, which gives you distance without the normal 3-point, 2-point, 1-point, or even 4-point perspective.
And do you find that this works much better than just painting that layer paler initially?
I do, because sometimes the layers start very close to the background colour and you build up stronger and stronger, and it's easy to see what you're doing if you're always painting in a strong colour and then painting it out.
We should say as well, we started with our course and we had our first lesson on Wednesday, which was really good fun.
Yes.
Hopefully some of our students are watching today as well. Our students, Dad's students. Oh, the reason I brought that up is what. Sorry, I'm watching Dad, and because no one's asking anything, I forget that I should. I have a role. But the reason I mentioned it, we mentioned it before, but we are going to be doing another course, and we're not sure exactly of the date. But if for whatever reason you really wanted to do the last course and you missed out, because we did sell out very quickly for the last one, we are taking emails if you want to sign up to be notified first about the next one. So obviously it would be difficult for anyone to commit to that without knowing the dates, but if you want to send us an email and say you would like first dibs. What is the email from the site? Is it
info@rogerdean.com.
info@rogerdean.com, and just say, put me on the waiting list, and then when we know the dates, we'll email you and let you know for joining the next one.
You can see I'm not painting the tree too carefully, but it is going back.
What's this painting for?
This painting really doesn't have a client, if that's what's meant by what's it for. It's a painting I loved once in a version that got destroyed, so I've always wanted to revisit, and I've revisited it. I did 2 of these in the live sessions, and I've changed them. They're both coming out quite different to how I expected, and I'm enjoying that too.
What's different and what's the same about the one that you're sort of copying?
The other painting had the tree on one of the rocks that was drifting off, and this one has now gone further into the background with a new foreground in the form of these rock structures here, and they are going to need a little bit more work because they need highlights on them, and I'm going to do that.
It's interesting doing the painting bit without it being live, isn't it?
Yes.
sort of feels like, I don't know, when flu is going round at school and you're in class and nobody's there.
It won't be a second, I'm just getting some paint.
Particularly right now, that is how it feels. Just wondering if there's anything. Well, let's do some close-ups while Dad's doing that.
From Roger Dean's MacBook Pro.
Alex has joined us. So do you think you'll get this one finished today?
Sorry?
Will you finish this painting today?
Pretty much, I guess, yeah.
So what are you doing there?
I'm smoothing it out.
With a wet brush?
Yeah.
So the zinc white is still a little bit damp while you're doing that. It's not completely dried.
That's right, yes.
It sounds like a stupid question, but I've definitely tried scraping acrylic off after it's dried with a wet brush. So I know it can be done.
All
Not
kinds
uniformly.
Of things. Yeah, all kinds of things can be done. I'm just I'm going to put some highlights on the shadows of this rock before I'm going to put the highlights that are in the sunlight, if you like.
Have you got a name in mind?
Nah, it's too soon. Probably by a couple of decades. Okay.
Definitely going to have to come up closer.
So I'm. This is highlighting in the shadows. So it's not. I'm not doing it in white. It's still quite a dull colour, but it's brighter than the basic painting.
What is it, like a pale grey?
It's a pale grey, yeah.
Can we have a look?
It's an opaque grey, whereas the rock was painted in a transparent.
I remember listening to Deborah Francis-White on the podcast The Guilty Feminist saying that she did this directing course with the Rain Dance Festival, and I did it too with a friend of mine in Japan who was running it, and he was at the Rain Dance Festival. But anyway, she said what was interesting about it was she'd always considered herself very kind of mild-mannered and conflict averse, but when it was her turn to direct the film, they kept being told, just get it in the can, whatever you do, get it in the can. So on her day of directing, just all of her kind of mild-manneredness went out the window, and she became a sort of tyrant, and all that was going through her head was just get it in the can, get it in the can. And the reason I mention it is that
Are we going to ignore that?
Yeah, I think we should ignore that. A similar thing happens when we're doing these videos. Is that Dad and I do get on quite well, but I noticed that when I'm doing the directing thing,
what she's trying to avoid saying is she becomes incredibly bossy.
well, the reason I mentioned, when Dad showed you the colour of his paint, my arm was underneath his arm, picking his hand up so he could show you the paint, and I just thought, you know.
Well, yes.
That's a bit micromanagey.
That is.
Let's go in a little bit. Is it alright if we're here?
Yeah.
I should probably say actually the course. Okay, sorry everyone. You may have noticed a little blip there. That was our internet, but we're back. What were we doing? What were we talking about?
what I'm doing here is just putting in the shadow highlights.
And I am providing the audiobook.
Yeah, I think Freyja switched it off because we were talking about how bossy she was, and I think she'd had enough and just turned it off.
I bossed myself into a corner. Let's go down a little bit.
Ooh, what's that doing there?
That's the marl stick, if anyone's wondering. Oh, what I was saying was, yeah, I did my directing course in Japan rather than at Rain Dance in London, and it's Rory O'Donnell who's doing it as the English language film school in Tokyo, and it was really, really good fun. I highly recommend doing their directing course or their script writing course. It was great. And actually, I directed a Japanese actor, and he was in Giri Haji after that. And his name is Masaya Mimura. And so they have great actors for the course as well. It's absolutely not related to this, but I just thought I'd better mention.
So what I'm painting here is not the highlight, it's the underpainting for the highlight. So the highlights will come later and go on top.
What colour would the highlight be?
They're going to be more like this was, a sort of orangey, creamy colour. But I think this sort of powerful underpainting in red will work well for it.
So do you often use two colours for a highlight?
It's very often a good idea to have the richness of multiple colours. I've often found, for example, if I'm painting something that's a bright green, it looks even brighter if it has speckles of red in it. So a bright green lawn, for example, if it has red flowers in it, but just red speckles, your eye reads it as vivid. So I do it.
Does it depend on opposite sides of the colour wheel being involved, or not necessarily?
Well, sometimes that works really well, actually. You know, if your painting is purple and you have yellow highlights, or yellow and it has purple shadows, that works very well. But in this case, this red, although it's a red and quite a strong red, it's actually playing the role of a cool colour, and the colour that goes on top will be more vibrant and more red. It'll be more in the orange spectrum, actually.
So we've been going about half an hour now, I think. Well, we've actually probably been going a lot longer with all the breaks in the internet and phone calls and things.
I see.
So is there anything else you want to show before we do the Q&A?
I'm actually thinking that, we'll pause on this and finish it later and go straight to the Q&A now. So I'm going to work on this while you rearrange the lights and cameras, okay?
Well, I think people would much rather look at you doing that.
Okay, we'll do the lights first then.
Not sure how with the camera not on. I should have done a course in cinematography rather than directing, really. Okay. Okay. We're good to go, and I'm ready when you are.
All right, I'm going to just...
So we've got your questions, and these are the questions from Monday the 15th of June. And it's fewer than usual because obviously usually we have the Wednesday live as well, but we've started the course. So we're only doing lives on Mondays now. And then we still have the Friday Q&A. But we've got quite a nice selection, I think. You ready?
I'm ready. Hello.
So, Andy Hosegood asks, have you ever considered having your paintings photographed as stereo photos, Victorian 3D? I think they would look superb, so full of depth.
It doesn't work. My paintings are 2D, and 3D photos are very dependent on, well, Victorian stereo photos are very dependent on a 3D subject. And the lenses are apart. They are typically as far apart as the average eye is, so that each picture takes a slightly different view. But if the picture exists, each picture taken in a stereoscopic camera gets exactly the same view. So the stereo effect doesn't work
Playing from
that way.
Teams MacBook Pro.
Having said that, I have on an iPhone you can make photos 3D, and I've tried doing that from a
Yes,
photo.
yes. Well, then people could if they want, but not in the way of a Victorian stereoscopic camera.
No. But you could do it with your architectural models and the architecture.
Absolutely, yeah. That would be fun.
Mm.
Actually, what would be more fun would be to build a fully visitable 3D model you can explore.
Well, we're working on that.
I'm thinking of a digital as well as a physical one. We're talking about that on Monday, by the way.
Yes. Yeah, Monday we're going to be talking architecture, and hopefully we can update you with some good progress by then, can't we?
We can.
Can't we? Russ Wilson asks, are there any new prog bands which inspire Roger to want to paint in the way which Yes Music has inspired him in the past?
I'm actually working with new bands fairly regularly, and I enjoy listening to it. Sometimes the new bands include guys who've been in other bands, and sometimes they're young people who are starting out, but they inspire me in a different way. It's always in a different way. Even if I wanted it to be the same way, I couldn't make it the same way. It just always comes out slightly different.
Thomas asks, any thoughts, stories, anecdotes about the Paladin Charge cover?
Well, not really, except it triggered an enormous number of biomechanical, not copies, but other things that came from that. I think it just triggered a world of biomechanical subject matter. And a lot of people back then would say to me, oh, I saw Paladin and I did this or I did that. So for me it was very interesting because it set a new subculture in a way that I wasn't really part of. I visited from time to time, you know, with the Black Bat and with Budge's Squawk, and there was a number of biomechanical things I did. But what came out of it was amazing.
That would be a good badge, actually. That one.
Get on with your questions.
No time for chats, okay? Joseph Silver asks, Well, actually, I don't know how to ask this question. This is very relevant to what I just said. Instead of a full bio, how about one of playful anecdotes? I love when you tell them. And I don't know what this is in reference to, but have you got any playful anecdotes?
No.
Okay, Mike Mahoney.
Well, we'll think about that. It's, the word appropriate comes into play here.
Yeah, in reference. Give us a theme, Joseph, and then maybe.
The only thing I can say in that is, over the years, a number of people have said, "Oh God, you should do a biography, or you should write about this, or you should write about that," and I've always thought, yeah, no. But recently, Freyja has been not collecting the stories, but going along similar routes, saying, God, if we put all these together, so maybe we should. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we should. I was just thinking it's funny, Rick is very good with these.
Yes.
But I think even if you asked him, can you give us a funny anecdote? I mean, where do you start with that kind of way of thinking? I was thinking about it the other day when I was running. I've been reading a lot during lockdown, and if someone asked me directly, what have you learnt in your reading, I'd really struggle to say. But if I started a conversation with someone, actually I don't know if I should say what I've been reading about, it's a bit grim, but about, let's say, Laura Ashley or North Korea. If we got into a conversation about either of those two subjects, I'd be able to pull quite a lot out of the box, but asking directly, I'd really struggle to think of something.
No, it's impossible.
Your mind doesn't work like that, does it?
I mean, somebody saying, tell me something funny is impossible. But actually, somebody saying, oh, okay, say something, talk. No. It doesn't work that way. It has to be much more tangential. Yeah. But thank you for the question anyway.
Yeah, give us a theme to riff off, or Dad one. Unless you did, and I've really massively just plucked that part of your question out of a longer thread, sorry. Anyway, Mike Mahoney asks, are there any plans to do another Steve Hackett album cover?
You should ask Steve. Okay. Steve and I have talked about things over the years, and there is a project I'd like to kind of nudge to the foreground, but this is really down to Steve. Personally, I'd love to.
I like this question actually. Sorry, they're all very good questions. Matthias Johnson asks...
She doesn't do politics.
How did you like doing book covers compared to doing record covers? How was the process different?
For me, it was totally different, and it was not something I ever really thought I would be interested in getting involved in. I know a great deal more about it by working with artists who did do book covers, rather than my own personal experience. When I did the cover for View Over Atlantis, for example, I did know John Michal, and we became friends, and later we published things of his. The profound and astonishing difference is I'm entirely involved with the band if we're doing it. It's almost never the case where I don't deal with the band. And yet with authors, it seems they never get engaged with the process of covers. The few who do are famous. Stephen King talks about art in some of his books, and he has talked to people who've designed covers for him. J.G. Ballard was very interested in art, and when we worked with him, he was very engaged in the process. But by and large, I'd say the difference is musicians are profoundly interested in how they're represented, and sadly, most authors seem to be utterly uninterested. And as a consequence, for me, the process was uninteresting. Yeah, I mean, and in a way, a book is too much information. You know, you've got to pull something out of that. But I like the vagueness of the world created by music. It isn't nailed down.
So what do you think would be the reason that a writer, as opposed to a musician, would be less, I don't know, connected to the artwork?
I don't know. I talked to a number of writers about it. I talked to Ursula Gwyn about The Wizard of Earthsea and Alan doing it. And she said, well, why aren't you offering? And I said, well, I couldn't. It would take too long. This wasn't for a cover. This was for the contents. And the lady who did Dragon Quest and all those, my dyslexia kicks in and I don't remember her name. But we had a similar conversation. She actually, unfairly, she was very interested in how her covers looked. Anna McCaffrey? Yes. She was very interested in not only how her covers looked, but she wanted to see her books illustrated, which frankly I think would have been a brilliant idea. I simply didn't have the 20 years it would probably have taken me. I did 3 paintings a year. For it to be effective, you need to do 30 or 40, 50. I'm too slow. Yeah, working with authors is fun. When authors are not interested, it's no fun at all.
I find it weird because I would have thought even if you're not interested, I feel like if I'd written a book, and obviously I'm coming at this from the angle of being an artist,
yeah.
But even if I wasn't, and I have got books that I've got about 3 on the go, I would definitely want some aspect of how I imagined it to come across, even if it wasn't kind of a literal illustration of one of the scenes in the book.
Yeah.
And at the very, very least, I would definitely want it to be made beautiful. Because I know that experience when you're going through a bookshop, sometimes your eye gets caught by something and you want something beautiful that you're taking around with you all the time. And it really, I would say, it impacts my experience of reading a book maybe 10-20% if it's really beautiful.
No, it absolutely does work that way, because I've done the same as you. There's a book I really wanted to get and I've got hold of it and I've thought, bloody hell, this is an ugly beast. And there's a book I wanted nearly as much. Boom, it's gone. And the one I really wanted, well, another day. It affects you. And I suppose that's all down to art directors in publishing companies, which is, to be fair, on occasion we were.
But there's this, I think, this sort of trend now, which I really like, for these sort of matte hardcover with embossing and gold foil over the embossing, and lots of detailed foliage or illustrations everywhere. And I'll buy any book that has that kind of cover on it. And usually there's something like medieval medical books or some sort of historical novel about somewhere. And whatever it is, I'll buy it.
Yeah, I'm looking at a couple right above your head.
But I mean contemporary ones that have that sort of, dust sheet of matte paper.
Yeah.
It's a very good question. He's written another good question that I like. This is Matthias Johnson. What is your opinion of Rudolf Steiner's organic architecture?
Well, I've read Rudolf Steiner because when I did all my research into architecture, I was advised to read him. And somebody not a million miles from me went to several Steiner schools. So I was enmeshed in Steiner thought through most of Freyja's childhood. Yes, yeah. My response is half-hearted. I like it better than most modern architecture, but it could have been so much better. And he had the backing. He was not in want of a great patron. He had them, and he could have done anything he wanted. So my guess is what he wanted was intellectually sound but aesthetically struggling.
I really liked it. I think particularly when I was little, going into the theatres and the different school buildings that had been built how he'd wanted them, because not all of the rooms and buildings were that way, felt really magical, and it felt like we were special, as opposed to when I'd gone to sort of normal schools to do my exams and things, where I felt like a little drone with my plastic tray with my name on it and my plastic chair, and I just felt like a little anybody. Whereas going into the hall, the Steiner schools or the theatres just sort of felt like, wow, you know, somebody cares about me and my experience.
Yes, that's true. But these were essentially ordinary buildings converted, weren't they?
The theatre wasn't. The theatre was all done. And a lot of the homes, the teachers and my friends all lived in homes that were designed the way that he'd wanted. But there were other buildings too that were sort of knocked up a bit more ramshackle.
What is his big building called? Is it not the Gotham name?
Some kind of crab thing.
I can't remember. Anyway. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Interesting. I liked it.
I liked it a lot. The whole aesthetic.
I like the way they made, in the very young kids, the primary school part, they used to make basically cotton tents in all the classrooms.
It was absolutely magical. We didn't have any plastic anything, no metal anything. We didn't have pens. We didn't even have pencils till we were about 12. Everything was crayons and natural everything. And absolutely at no point did we feel at all deprived. It just felt totally magical. All of these silk veils and cotton veils and little crystals, and I absolutely loved it. You don't need much when you're little.
There you go.
Okay. Don Rogers asks, why are the fish in Tails in a bubble on the album cover, but not that way on your Tails prints?
I painted it as I wanted it, and I do the prints as I wanted it. The bubble was what John wanted. I didn't, and it was never on the painting. It was a artifact of the printing process.
David Bagsby asks, are there any classical composers or works you gravitate towards?
Classical composers? Yeah, I guess. I like both.
Okay, I think this is going to have to be our final question. Monty Python or Fawlty Towers? Doug asks.
Why do I have to choose?
That is the premise, if you had to choose.
If I had to choose?
If you had to choose.
I'd have a real issue with whoever was asking me to choose.
Doug from the FBI.
Doug. I hate to say it because I love Monty Python, but I really love Fawlty Towers. What's your favourite?
Do you know what? I was thinking about this. It's difficult for me because I like them for very different reasons, except one reason, which is the same for both of them. Particularly when I'm in Japan or America or anywhere other than here, I find it incredibly comforting and nostalgic just watching Englishmen be stupid. I was like, home. That's what we're like. Yeah.
Actually there is yes, it's a damn difficult choice because I like the fact that Monty Python is all kinds of different characters doing all kinds of different situations. Fawlty Towers is a sitcom, and it's the characters are always the same characters in each episode. It's very funny, but Monty Python, I'm going to say if I was on a desert island I would choose Monty Python.
Because there's the variety and the amount. Or
I love the insanity of it. I have a great rapport with that.
Right. I think Fawlty Towers is really good from my point of view, because if anyone in Japan wants to visit England, I can just be like, before you go, just watch this first, and then they'll get a really good idea of you know, how to approach their trip. Like when Mitzias came to England and he said the air conditioner had icicles growing on it, so he called down to reception and he was like, I'm really cold, it's the middle of winter and the aircon has icicles, so they come up and brought him a blanket. People need to know this before they come here. That is what our service industry is like.
Yes.
Bit close to home as well though.
I had I was with a team of incredibly clever scientists working on the project with Hank in Moscow, and Andre we went down to eat, and the waitress explained in no uncertain terms that she didn't want to have to actually serve anybody, and she was going home in half an hour. And he was incredibly apologetic, and I said, don't worry, I come from England, you haven't been there yet, but when you come you'll realise even without communism we managed that.
I appreciate the half an hour warning. Was it Mum who said she went to a cafe? Was it you who went to some cafe and they'd attached chains to the knives and forks?
No, that was Martin and I. Yeah, that was. We had to do an incredibly early train journey. I think it was the first train out of King's Cross Station, and it was, I don't know, 3:40 or something like that in the morning. And we found even though it was ridiculously early, we arrived even earlier, and we found an all-night cafe that obviously had troublesome customers because we sat at the counter and they served us. They put the plate of pretty greasy food on the counter and then handed us knives and forks that were bolted to the counter on chains. And you have to think, how do they wash these up? What do they get used for when they're not used for eating? It was a dreadful idea.
Did you ever read Bill Bryson's notes from a
I did, yeah.
I just thought the first story in that I can't say on this because it's so horrible, but it's, yeah, very much like that.
Well, he arrives in Dover, and I lived and worked in Dover when I was a student, so I know what he's talking about.
It's the hotel owner obviously had been cleaning the bathrooms and objected to something that he'd done and was like, in future could you tell me what time you're gonna go to the toilet so I know when to come into your room and clean out. And he was like, I don't know, it just sort of happens, I can't tell you for sure. That's really, really good. That's really good. Awful people. And he said what he couldn't understand is there was someone there who'd obviously been there for years. They just sort of partly lived there under the kind of regime of this really terrible word.
Well, here's the sad thing. Apparently, Fawlty Towers is based on real people who the family got very indignant when they found that out.
It could have been anyone. That should be some comfort to them. It could have been any hotel in England.
It's getting better. It's not what we're good at.
No. So I'm going to check to see if the internet cut out and if we have to record all of that again.
Well, it would be fun.
Yes.
Thank you very much. We'll see you
on Monday.
Yes, see you Monday.
You're going to be doing architecture.
Yes. We've got the green screen, we've got the technology, we've got the producer, the director, the cameraman. It should work.
Yeah, we'll see.
Thank you very much.